Simon, not that far away either. The African Cup of Nations. We now hear up to 40 players in the Premier League are set to head to Cameroon for the Africa Cup of Nations beginning the 9th of January.
Yep.
But some would have us believe that this very tournament is being unfairly disrespected, and that there are other sinister aspects to that disrespect. Now, for that, have a listen to what former Arsenal striker Ian Wright had to say about this, because speaking on his own social media channel, Wright hit out at how this tournament, the African Cup of Nations, is being viewed.
Is there ever a tournament more disrespected than the African Cup of Nations? There's no greater honour, none, as a sports person, than representing your country. The coverage is completely tinged with racism, completely tinged. We played our Euros across 10 countries in the middle of a pandemic, and there's no issue at all. But Cameroon, a single country hosting a tournament, is a problem. You're getting journalists asking players getting asked if they will be honouring the call-ups for their national teams, if they will be honouring. Imagine if that was an English player representing the Three Lions. Have you ever heard anybody asking an English player will he be honouring the call-up? Can you imagine the furore? Loads of the best players in Europe right now are African. And if we love them at club level, why can't we love them at international level like their counterparts from across the globe? Why can't we? Why is this tournament constantly getting so much flack?
Simon, we'll hear from Patrick Vieira in a second, but what's your take on what Wright says?
When I listened to it yesterday, my first reaction is, when you get into the territory of Peter crying wolf about racism is a subject that needs to be attended to. And whenever racism occurs, it needs to be dealt with and it needs to be squashed. And I think most sane-minded people would want to say that and want to see that manifest itself. When you start hearing people like Ian Wright making overtures and observations about tournaments being tinged, or people's responses to players going away to play in a tournament which lands in the middle of a season, you're not comparing and contrasting properly, Ian. You're trying to make a point on a very sensitive subject, and what you do by making points like that is you discredit the idea of racism where it legitimately exists and needs to be removed. Because a tournament played in the middle of a season, compare it to the European Championships in the summer, when players aren't being demanded things from their domestic paymasters. Compare the World Cup. Okay, we know it's in November, but the season is being curtailed. If the African Cup of Nations want to get into a negotiation with the Premier League and the leagues around the globe to be able to curtail their leagues, they can have that conversation. But to turn that ridiculous observation into something about racism is beyond me, and it's an agenda that people like Ian Wright need to pare back from, because they do themselves no credit whatsoever.
Well, listen, having said what you've said, listen to Vieira, because he says this tournament should be treated like the Euros. Listen.
I respect and I understand the passion and the importance of those players to go and to represent their country, their nation. So I will never gonna stop any players to go to play the African Cup of Nations. And I believe that competition has to be more respected around, because this competition is as important as the European Championship.
So, I mean, the theme there is one of disrespect. He believes that the tournament, as a tournament, should be more respected.
Yep.
Now, maybe I don't think Vieira's wrong in that. Well, I think it deserves more respect, Simon. But where Wright, I think, is off track, is off piste, is bringing in this element of racism, which I do not see.
He's miles off piste. And this idea that every time you lift up something, there's racism underneath it, concerns me, and it concerns me for a variety of reasons. Not because I don't believe that a racism exists and that it needs to be attended to, but when you start manufacturing circumstances, like I said at the top end, Peter starts crying wolf, people start taking the bigger picture less seriously. The timing of the sooner this tournament becomes a summer tournament and becomes in between the European Championships and the World Cup and can legitimately find itself in a space where the domestic calendar, we all know that the domestic calendars are all powerful. I think we'd be having the same conversation if the European Championships were being played in the January of a football domestic season. We had the same conversation about South American players going to play World Cup qualifiers.
Yeah.
So don't make this about African players, Ian, and don't make this about colour, because it's got nothing to do with it. It's got everything to do with the domestic schedule and the clubs and the power of the domestic schedule dominating the desire for clubs to have their players not lost during key times of a season.
See, where I think Vieira's point resonates, Simon, is that Claudio Ranieri has raised doubts over Emmanuel Dennis's involvement.
Yep.
By saying Nigeria might have missed the deadline to inform Watford of their intention to select him.
But
they must have known that Nigeria were going to come in Watford and say we would like the player to be released.
That's not disrespecting the tournament. That's a domestic manager. The constant dialogue is about a domestic manager not ever. Ferguson didn't want his players to go play international duty. Was that some form of racism? No, it's domestic managers, and their priority is the league. And you've got this uniqueness about the African Cup of Nations where it's played smack bang in the middle of the domestic season. And so all of these managers are going to sit there. And of course, if Nigeria are lax enough to give a domestic manager an excuse not to lose a key player, who, by the way, for Watford, he's scored, 60% of their goals. They're going to turn around and go, I'm sorry, you've missed the boat. That's not disrespecting the African Cup of Nations. It's a domestic manager going, my priority is Watford and my job, not the African Cup of Nations. What's that got to do with disrespect? If the player knows he's going to be called up, if the Nigerians know they need to call him up, then they've got to do their job. They're not. What are we supposed to do? Are the domestic managers supposed to be sitting there waiting for it, reminding them they're going to? We want you to take our best asset. Please take our best asset so that you can play them in a tournament, and we can find ourselves in even deeper trouble in the domestic league, and I can lose my job because I won't be able to keep the team in the Premier League, which may happen anyway.
So it's really to do with the timing of the African Cup of Nations.
It's got nothing to do with anything else. The constant theme is about timing. If this tournament was being played like the Euros are being played or the World Cup were being played at a time when there was no domestic football, you would not hear a peep from anybody. Everybody would be respecting it in the same way that they respect every other tournament.
Does Ian Wright miss the point, or is it dangerous talk?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it's self-serving drivel. I think he's trying to make a point and elevate himself onto a platform where he doesn't need to be. There is racism. It needs to be dealt with. But when there is not racism, you don't need to make it about racism, because what you do then is you discredit the principle of where real racism exists, and it needs to be dealt with. So I think it's small-minded, binary, one-dimensional tosh from Ian.
Well, as it stands, as I said, 40 players from the Premier League set to head to Cameroon for the African Cup of Nations, which begins 9th of January. We'll keep